We begin by thanking our sponsors, the Talmud Torah sponsors, for the month, Paul and Kathy Pollack, in honor of their grandchildren. May they be zocheh to have much nachas from all of their grandchildren. The Daf Yomi Shir is sponsored in the schos of Refuah Shlema for Yehuda ben Michal, the son of our devoted Magid Shir, Reb Kalman Akiva Kovacs. Reb Kalman Akiva also asked me to announce that Amir Hashem, he's making a bris. The bris is going to be tomorrow morning, about 7:45 at Rabbi Golfez's shul. It will be a big cover for him, for anybody who can participate in the bris. The Week of Learning is sponsored by Gail and Doug Stenger. Mazel tov to Akiva Leib Weinberg on his bar mitzvah from his Bubby and his Safta. Mazel tov to the entire Weinberg mishpacha. Day of Learning is sponsored by Leah Sol in memory of Raymond Smith's beloved sister, Tammy Polanski. The neshama should have an aliyah and the family should have an achama. Daf Yomi is sponsored by Milton and Melanie Gertner in honor of their granddaughter Lucy, Esther Fruma, on her first birthday. Happy birthday. She came into the world quite early and had an extended stay in the NICU. But Baruch Hashem, she is growing beautifully. May she grow to be a source of pride and nachas to her parents and all of Klal Yisrael. Amen. Mazel tov. Additionally, we have a late-breaking sponsor. Saeed and Simha Hakain are sponsoring today's daf for a refuah shlema to one of our daf participants, to our dear friend Baruch Fischel ben Rachel, who's having surgery tomorrow. The surgery should go well. Mirz Hashem, Bernie should have a refuah shlema b'karov. Let us begin. Today's amud is a riveting amud. It's one of those amudim. Okay, I say that because it's really a beautiful amud because it really takes so much of what we have been learning over the past few days and kind of all just puts it together, and we see how everything comes together. All the different opinions come together, and it's kind of like a beautiful bouquet of flowers that we picked from all the different amudim that we have. We put all the shitas together, and we try to analyze who says what. Like this, we don't walk away from the sugya just thinking, I heard the name Rechon ben Akana, there was a name Rabbi Yitzchak that came up, there was a Rabbah, there was a Reb Meir, Reb Yochanan, Rish Lakish. The Gemara takes all of it and puts it together and makes sense out of the whole sugya. So it's an exciting amud, it's a beautiful amud. You have to hold your head together a little bit, but again, that's something we're very good at over here. It should not be too much of a challenge. The Gemara begins. Just a quick reminder of what we are doing. The Gemara was very much motivated by what seemed to be a stira. What was the stira? Our Mishnah writes very clearly that if a person is ma'anes, a person violates his sister, then the halacha is that there's going to be a knas. The problem was that we know there's a concept called kam leib b'derabba minei, that when a person has an action that he takes, and that action carries two punishments. One of them is more harsh than the other. We are going to implement the more difficult, the more harsh punishment, and we are going to let the person go on the easier punishment. So therefore, in the Mishnah in Mako says that a person gets malchus for violating their sister. It leaves us with a very big problem. How could our Mishnah say that there's a knas? A person should not get malchus and a knas at the same time. And therefore, we had a bunch of different answers. So the Gemara begins. We are starting, today's daf is daf lamed hey. We're beginning on daf lamed dalid. And we are starting 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, about 12, 15 lines up from the bottom with the word bishlama. Gemara says, remember Rabbi Yochanan, he explained that the Mishnah was going according to Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yochanan explained the Mishnah is talking about a case where there was no hasra. Since there was no hasra, therefore there was no malchus. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan says technically both halachas are true. However, there's a technicality in this case where there was no hasra, and therefore the malchus can't be implemented, and that's why there's a knas. Rish Lakish explained that our Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Meir, who says that there's both. There's malchus and there is a knas. Why was that? Because Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that this whole concept of kamle b'draba minei, where we don't give malchus, and a financial fee is only when the financial fee is actually covering a monetary expense, not when it's covering a monetary penalty. So the Gemara says, "V'shlomo Rabbi Yochanan lo amar koresh lakish dekamukim lakarabana." We can understand why Rabbi Yochanan wanted to explain that it's talking about a case where there was no hasra, there was no warning, and therefore we could not give the person the malchus. That must be because he did not want to find a das yachid. He didn't want to find one single opinion, which is owned by Rabbi Meir, and then say the Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Meir. He wanted to find an opinion that is more unanimous, that more people are going to agree with, and therefore he explained the Mishnah is talking about a case where there was no hasra. Okay, El Rish Lakish, my time Rabbi Yochanan. What was Rish Lakish's problem? Why did Rish Lakish have to go find a single opinion in Rabbi Meir and explain that the Mishnah is going according to this one single opinion? Why couldn't he just simply agree with Rabbi Yochanan and say the Mishnah was talking about a case where there was no hasra? The Gemara says, Amar Lach, Kivan, the ilu asru be pater, kilo asru be nami pater. Says Rabbi Yochanan, the reason why he could not agree, says Rish Lakish, the reason why he could not agree with Rabbi Yochanan is because he fundamentally disagrees with the concept that Rabbi Yochanan was advancing, which is, Rabbi Yochanan says that if there is a warning, and therefore we can actually give the malchus, in such a case, when the malchus can be given, he'll be exempt from the monetary fee. Says Rish Lakish that even though there would be a case where he does not get a hasra, still the action that this person took, since the action can hold him responsible for malchus, even if technically we can't administer the malchus to the person because there was no hasra, but the action that the person took, the avera that was committed, is an avera that comes along with malchus, automatically the financial fee is going to be waived. In other words, we have a fundamental machlokas here between Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. What happens if a person violates an act that comes along with a penalty of malchus, but there's a technicality we can't administer the malchus? What's going to be the halacha? According to Rabbi Yochanan, if you can't actually administer the malchus, so then yes, we will kick in the financial fee. According to Rish Lakish, the fact that you actually can't logistically administer the malchus does not mean that we're now going to slip in the financial fee. The financial fee is still not going to be there by virtue of the fact that an action was committed that comes along with a penalty of malchus. So that's what the Gemara says. My time alay Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Wakas Amar Lach. Rish Lakish will tell you, Kivan the ilu asru be pater, since if we would have given him the warning, he would have gotten the malchus, and thereby would have been exempt from the financial fee, kilo asru be, even if we don't actually warn him, nami pater, he's still going to be exempt from the financial fee. The Gemara suggests that they are going according to their own opinions, which are stated elsewhere. Where the Chiasar Rav Dimi Amar, when Rav Dimi came to Eretz Yisrael, he said the following: Chayave misos shogegin, v'chayave malkios shogegin v'davar acher. What does this mean? This means there are certain averos where if a person commits this act intentionally, b'mezid, they would be chayiv either malkos or misa. If a person would commit this act intentionally and be warned, the person can face the death penalty from Beis Din, or they can face the malchus penalty from Beis Din. Now, the additional word shogegin means that this act was committed by mistake, unintentionally. So when that comes into play, the halacha is the person cannot be chayiv misa or malchus. So a person does an act which would carry along a death penalty, but the problem is logistically the person can't get the death penalty because the act was done by mistake, or a person commits an act that would come along with the penalty of malchus, but the person cannot actually be punished with malchus because the action was done unintentionally, it was done by mistake, and in addition to that, they committed one more sin. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayiv. Rabbi Yochanan says the person is going to be chayiv for the additional sin. Why? Because the chiyuv of misa, the chiyuv of death penalty, or the chiyuv of malchus cannot be fulfilled because it was by mistake. So if the chiyuv of malchus or misa cannot be fulfilled because the action was performed by mistake, So then let's allow the davar acher, the other action, the other aveira, to go ahead and take its role, and therefore he will be chayiv for the davar acher. That is the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish Amar Pater. Reish Lakish says he's going to be Pater on the davar acher, on the additional sin. Why? Kivan the ilu asrube, because if you would have given him the warning, he would have been Pater, and he would have been chayiv misa. Kilo asrube, if the fact that you don't actually give him the warning still does not affect the fact he's going to be Pater on the additional sin. So here we have a beautiful machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, which is consistent with another machlokes they had elsewhere. And this is going to be a fundamental discussion for the next Amud, which is when you have the concept of kamle b'derabba minei. Everybody agrees in the concept of kamle b'derabba minei, which is that if you commit a very harsh avera, which comes along with a harsh penalty, then you're going to be exempt for a financial fee. What's the halacha if, because of a technicality, a person cannot actually be punished for the more harsh avera which was committed? Are we now going to say that because of a technicality, and he can't be punished for the chiyuv malchus, he can't get the malchus, or he can't get the punishment of misa, of the death penalty, are we now going to say that the person is going to have to incur the financial penalty or the lower penalty? Rabbi Yochanan says, yes, indeed. Since he's not getting the more harsh punishment, the more minor punishment takes effect. Rabbi Yochanan, Reish Lakish says, no, since the action was committed, and had there been a warning, he would have indeed paid the price for it. So the fact that there's a technicality in the way of him actually getting the more harsh punishment does not affect the lower punishment, and he will not get the lower punishment either. Now, Eisvei Reish Lakish to Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish went ahead and asked Rabbi Yochanan about the initial source of this. Remember, the initial source for the concept of kamle b'derabba minei came from a pasuk of v'lo yiyeh ason. That was talking about where two people got into a fight, and unintentionally they involved a pregnant woman in this fight. And this pregnant woman was struck by way of this fight that happened, and because of that she miscarried her child. Now the pasuk says v'lo yiyeh ason. There will not be the tragedy of death. In other words, this woman, this pregnant woman, does not die. That is the source of the concept of kamle b'derabba minei, which is if she doesn't die, and therefore there's no chiyuv because of her death, then there's going to be a financial obligation to pay the dmei vlados, the amount of money that she's entitled to because of the child that she miscarried as a result of this fight. Since this is the source of the concept of kamle b'derabba minei, we're going to analyze that pasuk to help us understand who's right. Is Rabbi Yochanan right, or is Reish Lakish right? So it begins with a question from Reish Lakish to Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish, who is the one who is of the opinion that we don't care if technically the person got the malchus or not. We care if the person committed the act that would come along with the malchus. He begins by asking, below yiyeh ason. If there will not be a tragedy of death, then anoshi anesh, the person will be punished. So my love, let us assume, is this not discussing a case of ason mamish, where there is actually a real tragedy of death. In other words, where she dies. Now, Rashi points out, ason mamish means imlo mesa ha'isha ye'anesh hanogev. If the woman does not die, then the one who was fighting will be punished. What will the punishment be? It will be b'dmei vlados, paying the fee that comes along for causing her to miscarry. Now, what this means is, if she will die, regardless of the fact that the person might or might not have the punishment for her death, because we don't know if there was a hasra. In other words, if she dies, it seems like regardless of what happens, the halach is going to be that the person is not going to incur the financial fee for the vlados. So it seems like, according to Reish Lakish, it seems like the only factor that we care about here is, did she die or did she not die? We don't care if the person actually receives the punishment. So my love ason mamish, let's assume this is talking about a case where there was no death. Now, if there was a death, regardless of whether there was a punishment, the person would not have to pay for the financial fee for the child, for the miscarried child, and therefore this is a riot to Reish Lakish. And a kasha on Rabbi Yochanan responds. Rabbi Yochanan and says, no, it does not make a difference whether or not the difference in the pasuk is not whether the woman died, rather lo din asa. We're talking about whether there's the actual halachic din, the actual halacha of what happens when someone dies, which is that there will be a chiyuv which comes along for her death. So again, this is a very fundamental dispute in terms of how to understand this pasuk. Rish Lakish understands that lo yeh ason means there was actually no death, and therefore that's the only factor that makes a difference, whether there was a death or not whether there was a punishment. Rabbi Yochanan understands the pasuk to mean that lo yeh ason means there's no din ason. There's no actual halachic manifestation of the death, which is the punishment, and therefore they're able to disagree, and still the pasuk's not going to be a problem according to Rabbi Yochanan. Ika Amri, there are those who say it exactly the opposite. That the question was asked from Rabbi Yochanan to Rish Lakish. Es Rabbi Yochanan to Rish Lakish, v'lo yeh ason anesh yeh anesh, there will not be a tragedy of death, and therefore there will be a financial obligation to pay for the miscarried child. My love din ason, isn't this referring to the halachic manifestation of a case where there is a tragic death? Lo ason mamish, no, this is referring to a actual ason mamish, says Rabbi Yochanan, says Rish Lakish. It's talking about a case where there was actually a death. In other words, again, there's a simple disagreement in terms of how to read the pasuk. Now that both Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish answered the question, we cannot use the pasuk as a raya, as a proof to either one of them. Amar Rava. Rava now goes and says, "Umi ikal laman de Amar chayavin misas shogigin chayavin." Is there really anybody who is of the opinion that says that when there is a action that would come along with the death penalty and the person technically can't be put to death, is there really somebody who's of the opinion that chayavin, that there would be a financial obligation that comes along with it? The Gemara says, "V'hatana debechizkiya taught us make adam umake behema." They compared the striking of a person to the striking of a behema. And what is that drasha? That drasha is ma make behema. Just like when a person hits or strikes an animal and causes damage, lo chilaktepo bein b'shogig bein b'mezid. The pasuk does not differentiate whether that striking happened intentionally or unintentionally. Bein b'miskavein, bein b'lo miskavein, whether the person intended to hit that specific animal or intended to hit a different animal. Bein derech yurida, whether the person was holding the axe and he was striking downwards. Bein derech aliyah, whether it happened when the person picked up the axe. Why is this important? This is important because when it comes to halacha of galus, a person running to Aryeh Miklat, the halacha is, there's a gzeras akasav. The pasuk teaches us that it does make a difference whether the person was on the way up with the axe or the person was on the way down with the axe. When it comes to striking an animal, there is no difference between whether the axe was going up or down. In any one of those cases, it makes no difference lepotro mimamon. Person will not be person will not be exempt from financial obligation by any of the above mentioned circumstances. El l'chayvo mammon, the person will be chayiv in any one of those cases. Af make adam. Similarly, when it comes to striking a person, lo tachlok bein shogeg, bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid, we're not going to differentiate between a case where the person struck the other person b'shogeg, by mistake, b'mezid, intentionally, b'miskavein, person had intention for this person, l'sheim miskavein, not having intention for this person, bein derech yirida, whether it was going down, l'derech aliyah, whether it was going up, l'chayvo mamon, to mechayev him, rather, el l'potro mimamon. In any case where a person kills another person, the halacha is, it makes no difference. Any of the above mentioned circumstances are not going to make a difference. In any one of those cases, the person is going to be exempt from paying money. Why? Because of the concept of kam lei b'derabba minei. We give the person the more harsh punishment. Clearly, it says over here, it makes no difference. What happens? The person is always going to be patur from money, whether it was intentional or unintentional. The person, if it was unintentional, the person can't be put to death. So clearly we see, when it comes to chayave misas shogegin, when it comes to a person committing an action which is punishable by death, it does not make a difference whether the death is actually going to be carried out by Beis Din. In any one of these cases, the person is going to be exempt from the financial obligation. So clearly, Tana de Bechizkiya is teaching us that the halacha is like Rish Lakish. Now you might be thinking, okay, so fine, Tana de Bechizkiya goes according to Rish Lakish. Very nice. Is this true that just because Tana de Bechizkiya holds like this, that means that everyone agrees with this? So I don't want to go through the whole Tosfos, but that is Tosfos' question. Tosfos in Umi Ikal Amanda Amar, he basically asks this question and says, it's very nice that Tana de Bechizkiya is of this opinion, but there are chalkim in Meseches Sanhedrin, and Daf Ayin Tesam Beis, there are those who disagree with Tana de Bechizkiya. So Tosfos explains that this particular circumstance is going to have to work out according to everybody. So now, here we have this question, how can it be that Rabbi Yochanan disagrees on the concept of Chayav Misas Shogegin being exempt from money? We clearly have Tana de Bechizkiya which says it when they compare striking an animal to striking a person. Ella ki asa Ravin Amar, it must be that when Ravin came, he said, Amar, Chayav Misas Shogegin kuli amalo pligi to peturin. Everyone must agree that when it comes to a case where there's chayav misa, where the person would be punishable by death, everybody would agree that there's no difference whether or not the death can actually be carried out by Beis Din. It's the action that is the action or the commitment of the avera that exempts the person from financial obligation. That's going to be true according to everybody when it comes to an action or to an avera that would come along with the death penalty. If it was carried out in the right way, where there was a hasra and it was bemazed and everything else came along with it, then yes, the person would be exempt from a financial obligation and therefore is always exempt from a financial obligation. Keep pleading when the Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish have this machlokes about technically the person got off on a technicality. The question arises: do you still have to pay? When the punishment for the action would be malchus, would be lashes. So it's chayav malchus shogin v'davar acher. Rabbi Yochanan Amar chayiv. Rabbi Yochanan says chayiv, as we mentioned before, that if there's a technicality and the person cannot get the lashes, cannot get the malchus, then indeed we would slip in the financial fee. And he explains, because chayavi misos iskish, chayavi malkios lo iskish. The chayav of misa is actually iskish, is brought close to the halacha of makeh behema, but not malchus. Rish Lakish Amar Pater, Rish Lakish says a person is not going to have to deal with the financial fee, even if he got off on a technicality. Why? Because beferish ribsa Torah chayavi malkios. Says Rish Lakish, the chiyuv of malchus is included in the chiyuv of misa. In other words, says Rish Lakish, even though this Tana de Bechizkiya that we learned really only compares killing, which is chayavi misa, to the halacha of makeh behema, of striking an animal. However, says Rish Lakish, I now have a later subsequent hekesh to bring, I shouldn't say hekesh, a limud from the pasuk to bring the halacha of malchus to be similar to the halacha of misa. The Gemara asks, Heichan ribsa, where did the Torah add in chayavi malkios, a punishment of malchus to be similar to the punishment of death? Heichan ribsa Torah, Amar Abaya asya Rasha. We learn from Rasha. In other words, it says V'haya and bin Akosa Rasha, and we have Ashahu Rasha Lamos, as Rashi points out, Nemer b'chayav misos Ashahu Rasha Lamos, v'nemer b'chayav malchus v'haya im bin akosa Rasha. So it says the Rasha both when it comes to a chayav of misa, as well as it says it when it comes to the chayav of malchus, and therefore we're able to compare malchus to misa. Rava Amar Asya Maka Maka. Rava says it's not the word Rasha that we learn from, rather the word Makkah that we learn from. Amalei Rapapa, the Rava. Rapapa says, very nice. Where are these two words Makkah? Where did you get them from? So, hey Makkah. Where does it say Makkah? Ilema umaka behema yishalmena. It says umaka behema yishalmena. As well, it also says umaka adam yumas, and you're trying to link those two words to compare the punishment of death to the punishment of Malchus, hypokatelixiv. That's referring to a case where someone died, not Malchus. Elahai Maka. Must come from this one. Maka nefesh behema yishalmena. Person strikes the nefesh of behema. The person has to pay for it. Nefesh tachas nefesh. A soul instead of a soul, which is referring to a monetary chiyuv. The samach leiv ish kitin mum ba'miso, person will give a mum and his friend kasher asa keni yasolo. Just like the person did, so should just like the action the person committed, so we should incur upon him this chiyuv. The Gemara says, hold on a second. V'hailav makahi. Doesn't say anything over there about a makkah. In other words, you're telling me that we're learning the word makkah from a malchus to a misa. It doesn't say anything about, it doesn't have the word makkah there. And maybe it says something, ki'itin mum ba'miso, person will put a mum, will give a wound to their friend, but doesn't have the word makkah there. Gemara says, anon haka kamina. Basically, chill out. Even though it doesn't actually have the word makkah there, we're not looking for the word makkah, we're looking for the concept of a haka. We're looking for a place where the Torah describes a makkah when it comes to malchus the same way it describes the makkah when it comes to misa. The Gemara says, hold on a second. That akka, that striking that you're referring to, what was that talking about? That was talking about causing bodily harm to somebody else. Now the problem is, we know from Maseches Bava Kama, when it comes to chovel bechavero, there are 5 things a person's financially obligated to compensate the person for. So we see very clearly, chovel bechavero bar tashlumenu. There's going to be a financial obligation there. So we see clearly you can't compare this. There's no malchus in that case. That's the case when there's a financial obligation. So the whole thing doesn't start. Gemara says, "Im eino inyan lahaka sheyesh pashava pruta." If that pasuk cannot be teaching us something about a haka, about a striking, where there is a financial obligation to pay the person because there was damage worth a shava pruta, teneu inyan, let us stretch this over to a place where there will be malchus. Do you know why? Because there is no damage worth a shava pruta. Let's now apply that to a case where there was a striking which caused damage which was less than a shava pruta. Okay, Gemara says, very nice. So, lav par tashluminhu. The person's not there, there's no payment over there. In other words, if you look at Rashi, hai lo tachlok bein bo l'chayvo momon, time mishum de'ein bo kedei tashlumin, vol mishum ekesha. In other words, you can't tell me that the reason why there's no financial payment there is because of the malchus. In other words, even if there's a technicality in your way which stops you from getting the malchus, still you have a financial obligation. The reason why there's no financial obligation over there is because there's no finances to discuss. The person's damage was less than shava pruta. So the Gemara says, lo, Tzricha must be talking about a case was the bahade de mechaya kara shirah and delay. At the same time that the person was actually assaulting him, he actually tore his shirt. So imagine this: a person hits somebody very hard and breaks his glasses. So that therefore, it's not going to be a direct result of the hitting. In other words, it's not medical bills. There's no tsar, not that much pain. There's not that much boshes that comes along. All the rest of the things are going to be very minimal. But there's an external chiyuv mammon over there because he tore his clothing. So there, he's going to be exempt from paying that because he was involved in a hakah which would come with malchus. So in other words, we are able to establish a case where there is going to be both a technical chiyuv for malchus as well as a technical chiyuv for mammon. He'll be off the hook on the money because of the malchus, even though the malchus is not happening. Amar le Rav Chia l'Rava, ulatana de Bechizkiya. Going back to this Tana de Bechizkiya, the Amar, they say make adam umake behema. We're going to compare the striking of a person to the striking of an animal, which is what we said before. Just like when it comes to an animal, a person's going to be chayiv on the damage to the animal, whether it was b'shogeg, whether it was unintentional, it was b'mezid, it was miskavein, lo miskavein, derech yirida, derech aliyah. So the same thing will be true when it comes to a person striking a human being, that it makes no difference whether it was any of those above mentioned circumstances. The person will always be exempt from paying money because of the penalty that comes along with actually killing somebody. The Gemara says, "B'may de b'chal." Why are you assuming that that case took place during the week? B'may de b'chal ksiv v'leka lefluge. Who says it's talking about during the week? V'leka lefluge, and we can't make any of those differences. Dilma b'Shabbos ksiv. Maybe that whole discussion was talking about where the person committed this act on Shabbos, and de behema gufa ika liflugi. Maybe that case took place on Shabbos, and when it comes to the actual damage of the behema, you could differentiate, create that distinction. What will the distinction be between shogeg and mezid? In other words, on Shabbos itself, there's a chiyuv on Shabbos for killing the animal. Even if it's not an actual shchita, the Gemara Masechtas Shabbos discusses killing an animal could either be tzoveya or it could be shchita. Nevertheless, the halacha is the person's going to be chayiv for killing the animal on Shabbos. Why don't we just differentiate in the actual killing of the animal on Shabbos? The Gemara says, Lo salkadaytach. We can't think that. It can't be that this case is talking about where it was on Shabbos. Why? D'chsiv umake behema yishalmena umake adam yumas. We have to have a circumstance where both of these things are going to be true. Maka behema yishamena, the person strikes an animal and would be chayiv, the financial obligation for striking that animal. Umaka adam yumas, and a person will be liable for death for killing the person. So hechi dami, idelo asrubei. If it's talking about a case where the person did not receive a proper hasra, he was not properly forewarned before he did it. So then, Maka Adam Amayumas. Why will the person be put to death? He was never warned. Ella Pshita must be Dasrube. He did get a warning. Okay, so if the case is talking about where there was a warning, so both cases must be there was a warning. Svi b'Shabbos, if it was on Shabbos, Maka Behemi Shalmena. Will a person actually have a financial obligation for killing an animal on Shabbos? There's no chiyuv mammon there. There's no obligation for finances there. Why? Because if he was warned not to kill it, he must have been told, don't kill the animal. It's Shabbos. You're not allowed to kill an animal. And if he kills it anyway, b'chayav misa for violating Shabbos. So it just can't be that this case is talking about where it was Shabbos, and therefore, indeed, the drasha can be upheld because it was talking about during the week. If it was talking about during the week, then we could compare striking of an animal to a striking of a human being, and just like when it comes to striking of an animal, it makes no difference whether it was a shogeg or a mezid. The same thing is going to be true when it comes to striking a person, and therefore, according to Tana de Bechizkiya, we do have this upheld drasha which tells us that chayave misas shogegin, when it comes to an action that would come along with a punishment of death, even though it was a shogeg and technically the person can't be put to death, nevertheless, the halacha is the person is going to be exempt from financial obligations. El-Alav, and Bechal must be talking about those during the week. Okay, now the Gemara gets really exciting. We're going to go back and we're going to have to pull together all the different opinions that we mentioned from a few amudim ago and try to figure out who holds what. Amar le Rav Papa le Abaya. Rav Papa says to Abaya, Le Rabba. Who's Rabba? We mentioned Rabba just yesterday. If we look at the bottom of Daf Lamed Dalid Amud Aleph, in the bottom of the page, Rabba Amar La'olam B'Toveach Hayidei Atzmov Rabbi Meir Loka Umeshalem Islay Nes Umeshalem Leslay V'Shani Hani Dechidushu Shechit Torah B'Knas. Rabba is the one who introduces Rabbi Meir and says, even though we have a concept of Kamli B'Drabba Minei, which says that when there is Malchus, there's not going to be a financial fee for a financial obligation. That's only true when it is a Chiyuv Mamon. But when it's a financial penalty, then we're going to give the person the penalty anyway. Okay, so Rabba D'Amar Chidushu Shechit Torah B'Knas. According to Rabba, who says that the Mishnah is Rabbi Meir because we're talking about a knas, and therefore there could be malchus, and there could be a chiyuv of mamon, of a financial obligation for a penalty. V'yafagav de mikdal mashalim, masnisin keman mukimula. Our Mishnah, how are we going to figure it out? Ikra Meir, if you're going to tell me that our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, kasha bito. We have a problem. We're going to learn this again. We mentioned this Mishnah yesterday, but it's the upcoming Mishnah. We have a question of Bito, of the daughter. Why? Because in that case it says there's no knas. Why not? It's just simply a financial penalty. It's a knas, and therefore there should be a knas when it comes to the daughter. The fact that there is a chiyuv of misa should not affect that. Ikra ben Nechunya ben Akana. Who's that? Nechunya ben Akana, he came up on Daf Lamed, if I'm not mistaken. And Daf Lamed. And what does Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana say? Nechunya ben Akana is of the opinion that there can't be a chiyuv of Misa and Malchus, right? Look at Rashi. He is of the opinion that yes, a person can get Malchus and he can pay. But he holds at the end, he's of the opinion that a person will never have a chiyuv of misa and a chiyuv of tashlumin. In other words, malchus and tashlumin, yes, but misa and tashlumin, no. So now, if we're going to try to say, let's go back to the Gemara. If our Mishnah is like Nechunya ben Akana, kasha achoso. Achoso is not going to work. Why? Because why is there no chiyuv of mamon for, or no? Look at Rashi. It's true that there's no chiyuv of malchus. Lo pater le liftre mishum kares. You should pater them. In other words, there should be no chiyuv of mamon when it comes to achoso because there's kares. In other words, he says while it's true that you will have a chiyuv of malchus and mamon, you're not going to have a chiyuv of kares and mamon. So why, when it comes to achoso, is there a chiyuv of knas if there's a chiyuv of kares? So the Mishnah can't be Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana either. Ik Rabbi Yitzchak. If you're going to try to say that it is Rabbi Yitzchak, who is Rabbi Yitzchak? Rabbi Yitzchak, he appears in Maseches Makos, and he says, Ein chayave krisus b'chlal malchus men. A person who gets a chiyuv of kares will never get malchus. The opinion of Rabbi Yitzchak is that if a person gets kares, there's never going to be malchus. In other words, according to Rabbah, that we're going according to Reb Meir. In other words, put this all together. That yes, there can be a financial penalty even if there is malchus, but that's going to be problematic. The Mishnah can't be Rabbi Yitzchak either. Rabbi Yitzchak's of the opinion that there is no chiyuv kares and chiyuv malchus. Kasha mamzeres. Mamzeres is a case where there is a chiyuv kares, and still hakol modim shuba malchus. Everybody agrees that there's going to be malchus there. So in other words, the Mishnah can't be Rabbi Yitzchak either. So we're drying out our options over here. We already excluded Rabbi Meir because Rabbi Meir is not consistent with the halacha of Bito. We excluded Rabbi Chuni ben Akana because Rabbi Chuni ben Akana is not going to be consistent with the halacha of Achoso. And now we're excluding Rabbi Yitzchak because of Mamzeras. So Hanicha Isav like Rabbi Yochanan. This would work out if you hold like Rabbi Yochanan. Hunami Mitaras Rabbi Yochanan. In other words, he can say that I'm going according to Rabbi Yochanan and say that since the actual chiyuv is not going to be carried out, so therefore we could then go ahead and slip in the lower punishment. El Isav like Krish Lakish. Hechi Mitaratzla. If he's of the opinion like Krish Lakish, how is this going to work? It's not going to work according to anybody. Ella al karchach, the Gemara doesn't say Ella. Al karchach Rabbi Yochanan Svirale. It must be that Rabbah is following the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan that you have to actually have that chiyuv working out when it comes to Malchus in order for you to be exempt from the lower fine, the financial fine. Amalei Rav Masna li Abaya. Rav Masna says to Abaya, L'reish Lakish to Amar beferish rips the Torah chayavi Malchus kechayavi Misos. According to you, or according to Reish Lakish, who says that Malchus and Misa are going to have the same halacha, and therefore, regardless of whether or not the chiyuv is implemented, the financial fee is going to be waived. Man Tana de Palagalea to Mechuni ben Akana. Who is the Tana who disagrees with the Mechuni ben Akana? The Gemara says, Rabbi Meir. We can choose it to be either Rabbi Meir or Rabbi Yitzchak. It will work whether it's according to Rabbi Meir. Meir says, Loka u'meshalim. Rabbi Yitzchak, it can be the opinion of Rabbi Yitzchak. If you look at Rashi, the Amar, Lo Shayach Malchus Bechiyavi Krisus, that there's no Malchus Bechiyavi Krisus. So either one of those can be the Tana who disagrees with the Mechuni ben Akana. It is a little bit early, but I think that we're going to stop here for today because the next Gemara from these two dots on starts off a whole new sugya, which is probably best to save for tomorrow. So we'll stop here at the two dots of Tana Rabbanan Aryeh, B'Shniyas LaArayis. Have a wonderful day. Reminder, Kalman Akiva is making a bris tomorrow, Mirz Hashem, at 7:45 at Rabbi Golfez's shul. Mazel tov.